And good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ATAR Cloud and Coffee discussion. Again, my name is Chris Oglesby with MorphWorks and co-host Bill Hunt of the SBA. Again, we're excited about today's guest. And before introductions, just want to give you a little bit about ATARC. The ATARC Cloud and Infrastructure Working Group is bringing this platform with the goal of bringing lessons learned and ideas to the ATARC community. Our focus will be a conversation about our guests' experiences, past and present, executing modernization and transformation efforts. There is a Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen to ask questions. So please put those in, and we will get to those as we get through the discussion. So now on to introductions. Tom Santucci is the Director of IT Modernization Office for Government-Wide Policy at GSA. I've actually had the pleasure of working with Tom, and he has a great perspective of delivering at DOJ, so both from an agency perspective and now has an enterprise view of modernization across the .gov domain. So Tom definitely brings a great perspective to today's call. So Tom, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Chris.
So Tom, maybe if we could just get into kind of a little of the personal tie. You and I met on DCOI projects, so the data center optimization, data center consolidation. So I guess to kind of start the discussion, the data center play in today's environment, right? We're living in an area that is, data center central, so to speak. However, that's not anybody's one data center. And so how are you seeing in kind of your history of data centers and now your position from a modernization standpoint? How are you seeing those experiences kind of come together?
Well, I've been treating cloud as just a regular data center. It should be part of the inventory. It should be part of the data center collection that we do on a quarterly basis, and we should start tracking that as part of just the regular inventory. I spent many times closing data centers in the middle of the night. We did a really good job at DOJ. They closed 99 data centers. They're ready to hit their 100th this quarter. I was a small part of that. I came out of the bowels of the data center in Rockville that we ultimately closed. And I came from building an enterprise monitoring system to running Remedy and interlacing that two and sharing the data between the CMDB and Remedy. I'm really a configuration management person, so I love data and I like reusing it as much as possible. So at DOJ, we really have many different lists, and we had a finite number of data centers we wanted to get to. So I work closely with DEA and FBI on providing those shared services to the rest of the department. And for all that wanted to move there, it was a pleasant experience. It took a lot of work on the other end. And I'm really proud of those guys for the service they provide.
So I'm going to jump in before, because I know Bill has just one more piece around that. I think one of the things that you recognized with your experience was kind of the need for advocacy, because it isn't necessarily an easy decision, right? You're used to what you have, you can see what you have, and I think we talk a lot on the show about that emotional side. I think you had a mastery at kind of that advocacy. So, how do you see that in kind of your current role?
I had mentioned this earlier this week that, would any of this happen without a mandate? Probably to some degree. But the beauty of this is that we get to put it on metrics and measure it over time. GAO just came out with a report this week, Monday. It was sitting on my desk. We saved over $6 billion over the last 10 years doing data center consolidation. And I just don't think that we would have known how much we saved not having the mandate all this time. We can argue about some of the specifics and the metrics, but we need to keep.
Okay.
Don't derail the show, Bill.
Sure.
Wow, I hit a nerve.
Sorry, continue.
But I think we need to continue it and expand on it. I think there's a couple different areas that we could expand on. This mandate is doing cloud inventory and just treating it as a data center. There's no difference between a DOJ run data center or an agency run data center to the cloud, and pick your vendor. You're running government-wide applications in a data center, and we should know where that is and how much you're paying for it and how you paid for it, or how you're paying for it, so we can find commonalities and reduce the cost by doing government-wide acquisitions.
So you did hit some nerves there, but I'm gonna let it slide. So I do want to talk a little bit more about DOJ and specifically, when you're talking about this, about, the DCOI mandate. So obviously, for those of you who don't care about the numbers, M1619 was the original DCOI memo that came out in 2016. I ended up updating that a couple of years later in M1919 and basically just trying to refine some of the metrics and stuff here. But going back, rewinding the clock a little bit, I'll never forget being my first couple of weeks in at OMB, being the brand new data center lead and being handed this policy that people just weren't really moving anything on. They just didn't want to do it. And so I went over to Department of Justice and sat down with the CIO at the time, Joe Klimovich, who is, if you've never actually talked to Joe Klimovich, he's just a machine. He just consumes and digests information and comes up with the best policies, and is just a force of nature. And I desperately miss him from the CIO Council as that force of nature he brought to the table. But I'll never forget this. Justice was leading in data center consolidation, like you're saying, like hitting 100 data centers for most agencies is amazing. That's huge. That's a massive number. And so I went to Joe and I said, Joe, I can't get anybody else to do this. Like, nobody else wants to adopt this policy that's a federal requirement. And you all are way ahead. Like, what are you doing? What's different? And he said, he was much more polite than this. I want to be clear, he was much more polite than this. But he was like, I don't care about your policy. I care about security. I'm shrinking my security footprint. It has nothing to do with your mandate or your policy, you little, I mean, he didn't say any of this. He's way too nice for this. But the way I interpreted it as a brand new wet behind the ears policy analyst was like, oh, okay. So we talked about the mandate, and I appreciate that FATAR requires us to have this in there. 44 USC 3602 puts it in there and requires us to do this. But from my standpoint, it's not just about the mandate. It's about having the right people who care about the right cause. So there's a question in here, I promise. I'm not just telling stories now. I met you a couple of months later, and we got to sit down and talk about this. Can you talk a little bit about how your transformation journey at Justice was impacted by having that sort of top cover support and initiative to get this stuff done, and how that kind of impacted the culture so that you all were able to be as successful as you were?
We wouldn't have been able to do anything without that mandate. And it came from the top down. It came from the Deputy Attorney General sending out a memo, the CIO sending out a memo, and it was incorporated in the acquisitions or the investment reviews. Without that top cover, I wouldn't have been able to get anybody's attention in doing any of this. And I could talk about some of the benefits of moving, and why are we running this data center with floor air conditioners? They didn't want to hear that. They wanted, I think they cared about the business of providing applications to users. They didn't care so much about the data center. And that's some of the problem. Is data centers an art, is a science as much as an art. And I think we don't have enough data center operators, professional data center operators in the federal government. And it's probably not our forte. It's not our core business. We provide applications to make citizens better, or provide government, so government works better. We just are not very good at running data centers efficiently. The ones that are very efficient out there are probably underutilized. Then you have other ones that are overutilized, that are fighting for resources such as cooling or power, and it gets expensive if those things start to fray. So I mean, I'd just like to see if we can't continue to do better in that regard. And one of the things I liked about your policy, Bill, and I mean to nix it because I love it, is the key mission facilities. Saying out there that some of these data centers just do need to exist because of latency, and until network costs come down, those things need to stay where they are. Trying to overcome the network cost there's no return on investment on that. And all you're doing is adding risk to your user base, at least in a pre-COVID world, right?
So are we allowed to call it Bill's policy going forward?
Legally, it is not Bill's policy, and please do not associate my name with anything related for official purposes.
Well, so I got a quick question on that. I came from a heavy data center focused company EDS, right? So I think one of the defining companies within in the data center market. But it was interesting. Prior to that, I was with a company that we were working with the consolidation of the data centers in the DoD, right, into DISA, right, the data centers that they were the mega centers at the time. So has it ever been discussed on the .gov side again? Because there are some pretty world-class data centers in the .gov domain. Has the discussion ever been almost a data center agency, so to speak, that could be a path to kind of the art and science of data centers? Has that ever been discussed in any of these modernization calls? I'm gonna throw that out to both of you.
I'm not a panelist. What are you doing?
Sorry. I thought it was Bill's policy. I thought for sure.
Is this an intervention? Because no, Tom, go ahead.
Well, we are buying commercial data centers, but we don't know how much because we're not tracking it. It's an optional reporting entry within the integrated data call that we do every quarter. So I'd also, I'd like to see us consolidate those purchases, right? Rather than the onesie twosies and buy a cage at one of the data centers. And we're probably interdismissed throughout that data center. So I'd like it be part of the strategic plan of an agency debt consolidation is to do that. There are some out there. I know of one agency, it's working with GSA on obtaining a data center that's going to completely replace one. So that's good to hear. And I know there's a lot of data or agencies buying commercial data centers. We just don't know how much.
I mean, we do have I will say, like, going to the original question, there is government cloud that is being built in a variety of different arenas. Justice, for instance, has kind of led the way on, building an IC cloud, right? Like buying up dark fiber, putting data centers in. I'm not going to go into infinite detail here and get anybody in trouble, but the point being that exists. DoD, has their own clouds that they have built as well. There isn't really a civilian cloud that's been built yet, though, for civilian government agencies. Cloud.gov, for all what the name is a fantastic product and everybody should use it, but really it's just a wrapper on top of AWS. It's not a government-owned data center. I expect personally, just, Bill riffing here, some point we'll see that happen, though. I think that people will realize that, given all the supply chain risk vulnerabilities and everything else that we've been seeing lately, at some point we're not going to trust some of the civilian side stuff to these commercial providers the same way that we currently don't for, say, IC or DoD for some of those specific purposes that they use this specialized clouds for. So I think that's kind of a inevitability. But to tie this back to the core narrative here that I think Tom and I generally largely agree on, it's about the purpose, right? So Tom, again, to kind of like tie this back together to what you were starting to go down the rabbit hole of a little earlier. You and I have worked really, really closely, and Chris as well, on the whole concept of application rationalization. So, it's, for me, the data center consolidation effort really was no longer about the data centers by the time I had picked this policy up, and I went to Margie Graves, who was the acting CIO, federal CIO at the time, and said, you're missing, we're going to miss the point if we just look at data centers. To your point, you got to look at cloud and data center together. And the only way you get at that is if you start consolidating in a way that is fit to purpose. So I don't want to steal any of the thunder here. Tom, you've been one of the loudest outspoken voices on application rationalization. For people who are just tuning in today and have not gone through this process, can you walk us through a little bit about, what is application rationalization? How does application rationalization work in an agency that's doing it properly?
I think it brings together many different disciplines. Configuration management, for one, knowing what you have, documenting it, and keeping it dynamic enough where it's not a spreadsheet in a moment in time. Then you're providing that data to key decision makers, your enterprise architect, your CTO, your CIO. All of the direct reports of the CIO should be using that same data to make conscious decisions about whether an application should live or die and where it should reside. And making also a decision why you want to have that application, and moreover, where it should reside. Do you need better business resiliency, or do you need to reduce costs? Because it's not about just reducing costs. It may be increasing costs and increasing service delivery. Those things are not free by any means. So it's just making conscious decisions about your IT portfolio. I did a pilot when I was at DOJ, and that agency, albeit small, had 3 investment line items in the budget. They had 5 CSAM systems, security boundaries, and they had 150 applications. And nowhere did that CIO know how those applications were related to CSAM or the IT investment. And it was the first time he had seen that. And that would seem to me to be a good IT portfolio management. It's really getting into the weeds of knowing who works on it, what's the total cost of ownership, first and foremost, and accounting for everyone's time. They're spending their time on something. It's not just labor is not some cost. It should be tied to something. Attorneys do it every day. Mm-hmm. They don't. Accountants do it also. They bill for most of their time they spend on the company. So that's really application rationalization in a nutshell. It's sort of making business decisions. IT portfolio at its heart, really.
So, the one thing, and we've talked about this on the show is, the concept of the lift and shift, right? The path to cloud first, and then the new bill policy as it was written in Cloud Smart, right? Which was really to the point earlier, kind of a step back. And so, growing up in construction, I always try to liken things to that aspect of things, and the downsizing or the move is really kind of opening those boxes and looking at it, right, and getting that value. I mean, are there within some of the guidebooks, and for those that may not know, we can get you just directed to cio.gov for some of this, some of the content that Tom's organization creates. But are there guidelines that you guys have on basically opening those boxes and really kind of figuring out, hey, does this picture have any value to me anymore, right? Does the shot glass I bought in the Bahamas really matter? Do you guys have those type of products available for folks that are looking to do this?
Yeah, it's a good time to bring in the cloud and infrastructure community of practice, which we manage. We have 1,700 members, and my whole intent is to have our PMO really build some artifacts for agencies to use today and tomorrow. You shouldn't just have to attend a meeting to gain some information that we may be able to provide to you on a monthly basis that we do. So we are diligently putting together artifacts to publish on cio.gov under Cloud and Infrastructure Community of Practice. And one of those is the Application Rationalization Playbook. It was built in 2019. Steve Nauman was the author, as well as Bill.
Steve gets all the credit. Steve did the hard part. I just spell checked.
Well, that's a job because Steve can't spell, but
Or Steve.
He's not even here to defend himself, but I don't know that we have that much time to have Steve on. So.
Steve, if you're listening, we're going to have you on the show. It's fine. You can defend yourself later. I promise.
Yes,
sorry,
you need to get
continue.
him on.
Sorry, continue.
I love listening to him. The application, we really put together the playbook, and we've done some next versions of that as well, because it really does incorporate organizational change management. The organization is itself, and I've mentioned the direct reports to the CIO really need to be on the same page of what data they're collecting. It kind of bewilders me when OMB asked a question on the IDC, how much time did you spend collecting this data? And you should get a demerit for spending too much time having to collect this data. These spreadsheets are just mind-boggling at times, that you have to do this in collecting information. And application rationalization is really getting the foundations and getting the process in place to make a business decision on an application. And it doesn't have to be we say application, but it doesn't necessarily have to be an application. It could be a service, a network backbone, for instance, or a data center itself as a service. So you make those decisions whether you should keep that data center or consolidate it with other data centers. Application is just a term that we use. Steve always likes to say maybe it should be called compute rationalization, because it's not geared to systems or applications.
Yeah, and I think that's key, right? Is being able to dig a little bit deeper than the discovery tool, so to speak, right? Is to really, again, Bill talks about, right, from that enterprise architect standpoint, you really need to have that full understanding versus just a sliver, right? And that sliver can't just be a quick discovery. There needs to be some true kind of deep dive discovery.
And to that, I mean, we've got a question in the sidebar that I'd like to thread in here too. Jared asks, what are your thoughts on utilizing software like DSIM, et cetera, for managing your data center with a small staff? And for me, the other side of this, going to Tom, the question you're talking about the labor involved in the data collection, using automated monitoring tools that can kind of get at some of that information for you, so that you're not having to run around to every single like server, log in, see what the workloads look like, doing all the manual work in a facility, I think can make that a little bit easier. I mean, obviously, I'm going to be full of myself for a moment and say we also significantly reduce the number of fields that are required to be reported for the data center IDC. But overall, I mean, can you talk a little bit about your background as a configuration management, how you can use some of these like automated tools to make this process simpler, and more precisely when you're trying to make that sort of a decision and adjudication, how you can use these tools to make data-driven decisions?
Well, DSIMs are really good, and now there's HDIMs that they've expanded on. It's the only tool that's going to match your physical infrastructure to your virtual infrastructure. So it's really, for a data center operator to exist, they should have DSIM. They should be monitoring their environment, doing rack allocations, locations, and it seems fundamental to me to have a DSIM to run a data center. And then you use that data for not just the data center operator, but for the people populating that data center and your monitoring team. I'm a big believer that you should have a centralized monitoring team outside of the application owners. And the application owners feed them requirements and see if they're meeting those requirements through the various shared services that are providing application or that application services. And I think that monitoring team is really key because they have that big, broad view, and they need data. They need data discovery can get you there, although albeit very difficult. Data discovery tools are really good if they work. And the problem is none of them really work, and it requires a big team to put those together. And it probably provides too much data. So there's probably a sweet spot in there of doing nothing versus doing entire data discovery, and finding out what the key functions are, because you want to know if the applications are meeting the needs. Are they being overutilized or underutilized? And those are key decision points that you want to know, whether, for when that application comes up for recycle, or an annual review or a 3-year review or whatever it is. Those are things that you need to know to make a decision on that thing.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of piggyback as well as I guess kind of expand on, Tom, you talked about the art and science of data center, right? The DSIM tool is only as good as the processes that you have in the science of it. There is an art to the data center as well, but as you look at the technology that you want to put into a data center, into an organization, that the adoption is critical to the processes you already have in place. If you have poor process, if you don't have a formalized process around application review, tech refresh, onboarding of new technology, the tool is only as good as what you have in place from the process standpoint. Do you agree? I guess
yeah,
both of you. So we've got another question here of Bill. You seem to be, I don't know, maybe it's the way Tom, Tom and you connected on the bill policy, but so we got here from Tom Beal. Tom Bill, you mentioned the government is, in general, is not great at running and managing their own data centers, with some exceptions. Yet the current FATARA DCOI scores show nearly all A's. Can you please share thoughts on that? Are the right metrics being used from your perspective? So I'm gonna put that one at, because I think there's a little bit of crossing pieces there, Tom. So
You're the guest. You should go first on this one.
Yeah, let me hang myself, please. You know, it's a good time to ask that question because we are meeting with the agencies and the OMB desk officers to determine what their annual strategic plan goals are for the year. They're due in May. So between now and then, I'm going to be meeting with all 24 ACT agencies on in determining their goals. I think the desk officers are going to be more involved this year than they ever were before. I think with the new administration ramping up, I think there's going to be more attention on the goals aspect. So it may not be quite as easy to achieve an A as in previous past.
I think the question also starts diving into, are these the right metrics? Is this the correct metrics? And Tom, I know you and I have talked about this extensively. For anybody who's sort of new to the DCOI community, back in 2017, I think it was, we were holding through OMB was holding, not we anymore, sorry, regular meetings through the Cloud Infrastructure Community of Practice, through the CIO Council to talk about these metrics and really analyze what makes sense for the federal government. If you read M1619, there's some stuff in there that I think was really well-intentioned, but really didn't drive the government forward. Like the metric, particularly around server utilization, no one met that unless they were lying. It was just impossible to hit that number because it was so unreasonably high, way higher than the private sector even would consider a best practice. And also you don't want your servers running at 100% capacity 100% of the time. That'll burn down your data center. So, Tom, you and I had the conversation a couple of weeks back about, what should we think about with regard to these metrics, moving ahead, and are they the right metrics? I'd say, personally, and Mr. Connolly and I strongly disagree on this topic, that any scorecard must evolve over time. The things that you're measuring and how you're measuring it need to evolve over time. And Tom, the conversation you and I had, was talking about what actually matters with regard to data center management these days. I personally believe that, generally speaking, we're kind of trying to squeeze blood from a stone at this point. We've been doing data center consolidation for 10 years. We've closed a lot of what can be closed. All the low-hanging fruit has been picked. So we're gonna have to buy some ladders and get a little higher up that tree if we want any more fruit out of this. So Tom, this is why I really love the conversations you and I have been having around application rationalization, thinking about the placement of things, and the key mission facilities for data management that you brought up earlier, the things that we know that we're gonna have to keep. Some of those fruit you can't pick because we need them to run the government, and that's critical infrastructure. But thinking about the metrics in specific, you and I had a really great conversation about virtualization, for instance. So I'd be curious, from where you're sitting, and obviously, you can disagree with me about what you've been thinking about with regard to the metrics themselves. And specifically now that we're starting to think about the move to cloud and how we treat these similarly, what you really care about from a metrics perspective and what we should be looking at. Sorry if that's a tough question.
Well, one of the things to the questionnaire, the right metrics need to evolve, and I think that's a good term. I think the difference between cloud first and cloud smart was people interpret that as cloud only. And really, cloud smart just redefined it to say, make it an alternative to colo or putting it into a data center. And I really think people start to understand that because a lot of them moved to the cloud and determined they needed to pull back because it wasn't cost effective for them. And I think people realize that cloud is not the most cheapest thing out there. It depends on the application that you need to run. If you're running steady state and you're mediocre at best on performance, if you don't have the big highs and the low lows, cloud may not be right for you. if you're just running simple infrastructure that doesn't expand or have a 9/11 effect, if you will. SBA is a good example of it needing to expand greatly overnight. And you guys are, we're really proud of you from a federal employee standpoint that, an agency was able to respond like that. And I'm to Tom's point, or to Tom Beal's point, we really need to understand the total cost of ownership of running a data center. We could dump millions into cold aisle containment for one data center. Imagine what that would buy on the commercial market for storage or whatever. And one of the other things that really is struggling in the federal government is how we buy compute. Mm-hmm. The year-end purchases of seems to be, let's buy more storage, which is the most power consuming product we could buy. It takes up the most space, and yet who knows if we even needed it. They just needed to burn that money at the end of the year. So I think the multi-year life cycles that I've been hearing being promoted would help us in a great deal. If we'd be able to buy deep discount cloud computing over multi-years rather than fiscal year.
If I can definitely foot stomp that, if anybody on this call is moving to cloud and not looking at reserved instances for your compute, please look into that, because that is going to save you so much money. Please do not just buy the regular compute, do reserved instances. Oh my God, please do that. Also cold storage whenever possible. You do not need premium storage for all of your data. I don't care what your analysts tell you. Also, you need half the compute that your analysts tell you that you do. They're lying to you, but I digress.
Not bashing any analyst that might be on the call.
All of those things are wrong. No, but Tom, your point is well taken. It's about looking at all of the things and doing the comparison, the full total cost of ownership. But I will say, maybe you can talk about this a little bit too. Going back to your distinction between cloud first and cloud smart, the check is in the mail, by the way. Some agencies adopted cloud first so radically that they just lifted and shifted everything. And you had every single little program office going and buying their own little cloud instance of this and their little cloud instance of that, to the point where we're now seeing some agencies having to do cloud consolidation because they went so aggressively and didn't do it in a rational, wink, wink, way. Can you talk a little bit about how you can pragmatically approach this stuff so that it isn't just sort of an all-in-one, it's not always just the TCO, right? It's also about these other constraints and capabilities. Can you talk a little bit about how to do it smartly?
Well, it really has to be at the highest level of the agency or department. And because if all we're doing is lifting and shifting applications to the cloud, we really haven't done much. So, those redundant applications that could be consolidated into a shared service really should be looked at. So as you're seeing these things come through the IT acquisition review boards that should be happening at the department level, you should be collecting this information to say, hey, I just approved 6 other ones that look just like this one, and put together a shared service team to really evaluate that. I know that in reality, that sounds like a good idea, but generally, some people, it depends on who's running the project on how much money that would cost to create a shared service, because they become really risk adverse having taken care of customers. That's where you really need a neutral third party in there to understand the requirements and the infrastructure to determine what is the best fit for that service as a whole. And if you may have 40 of the same application running within your infrastructure, CDM will tell you that. What it doesn't give you is the answer of what it should look like at the end. To bring back DOJ, when we had 110 data centers, the CIO at the time, Luke McCormick, said, I think it should be 3. And I found out this week that it was on a whim that they picked out 3, but it was a goal.
Luke can say that now that he's on the other side. He was the host of the show.
There was probably a lot of information that they used to gain that number, but the fact is that you really need to pick a number and shoot for it, right? DOJ's down to single digits, and maybe they'll never get to 3, but they've closed 99 data centers. That's a huge success. DOD and some of the other agencies, DHS does not have any data centers in the inventory. They're a huge success. I was talking to the deputy CIO at DHS, and they talked about ICE. And I had learned about ICE when I worked at DOJ on the phenomenal job they did over there. They were basically given a mandate to get out of the data center, or out of this business. And they had 9 months to move to the cloud. And they were able to do it without any interruptions in service. So there's always something to be said for picking a mandate, picking a goal, and doing everything you can to get there. Because if you do it organically, where let's just see if we can do this kind of thing, it just doesn't materialize, and nobody's motivated to really pick a number and be on the hook for it. It provides cover for your employees that work for you to really take on additional risk.
So I want to on that, because I think it ties a little bit to the next 2 questions. Kind of asking Dennis a few more detail points, and they're looking into cloud migration and server support. But I think having as a company, we've obviously done it as both of you gentlemen in agencies have done it. Where again, I'm going to go back to where are areas that organization can go, right? The kind of this shared community. It's what we're trying to do here at ATARC. But we had Dennis, if you don't get a chance, go to ATARC site and look up Mike Cassidy's session. I think we talked a little bit about there, but it is difficult within the government to go find the successes. And so are there areas within the CIO.gov, within what you guys are doing on Cloud Smart around kind of the cloud migration and server support that Dennis might be able to access, outside of us getting into a real consolidation conversation here in the last few minutes?
Yeah, we run that community of practice monthly. We have the head of CDM presenting in April, Kevin Cox, who was a colleague at DOJ, by the way. And that's where if you have a .gov or .mil email address, you can join and attend and participate in all of those. We also have an offshoot of the cloud infrastructure community of practice is the working groups, where we'll take a particular topic. Last year, it was the cloud strategy document that we put together. We got the best and the brightest from 7 agencies, and we're able to produce a document that showed you from lessons learned how you should approach cloud, from the pre-planning stages. Mike Cassidy talks about this a lot. You know, it was 18 months to 2 years before he thought about moving anything to the cloud. There's a lot of planning. There's a lot of looking at your inventory, doing the application rationalization process, and not just moving and then coalescing. It's more methodical than that. Mike can talk about it all day long, everything you need to do from inception to beginning of the implementation. But I think there's some realities here, and I want to mention this before I think I found a quote from 2010 on federal data center consolidation initiatives and why we were doing it. It was to deal with the harsh realities of the budget. And that was back in 2010. I think it still applies today. It's going to be some harsh realities. People just can't continue to isolate themselves and run their own individual niche applications. We're going to have to move to shared services, and that's the only way we're going to be efficient in this. If we look at the application layer, we did $6.2 billion in savings for data center consolidation. Imagine what we'd do at the application layer. I mean, it would dwarf data center consolidation savings. If you think about, and it's not just licenses, the licenses are relatively cheap to run an application. It's the 10, 20, 30 times labor to run that application and keep that going is really the cost savings.
And I know the 2010 report that you're referring to. If you actually because the same language was repeated, if you go back 20 years before that to the Klinger report, which birthed Klinger-Cohen, which said exactly the same thing about IT management. So it's not like this is new. This is perennial in government. Every few years, it's, well, we really need to save money on IT and modernize. And I'll say this, the federal government has done such a good job since that 90s report that we have gotten from $2 billion to $80 billion in IT spend. So good job. Good job, everybody. We're really saving money on IT through savvy investing.
That, by the way, was Bill's allergy medicine. That is.
Oh, I'm spicy today, y'all. Now, you all just bring it out. I mean, we all have been working on this together for so long that, it's just all the trauma is coming out. This is really therapy for all of us, I'll say. But no, I mean, like, the point's well taken there, Tom, on all of those things and starting to look at it. The only thing I would caution is that I have seen at some agencies, how to put this politely, because of the fact that our budgets continue to get squeezed and IT is the first thing that gets squeezed, your cloud spend, you can't reduce, generally speaking. Once you're invested, once you've lifted and shifted, once you've moved your applications there, like, you can't turn down your service level and have your customers be okay with that. Generally speaking, most agencies really struggle once they've hit that. Now, the stuff that we talked about earlier, like, you can rationalize that down sometimes and find things like reserved instances and places like that to pick away at those costs. But the power of the budget that the data center brings, and I do want to underscore this, is that you can just not do a hardware refresh, and that can make up a shortcoming in your budget. You can't do that with cloud anymore. And also, as we all know, like, data center practitioners, we don't pay them especially much in the federal government. Those are like GS-12, GS-13s that are like running around at most. And cloud engineers are GS-15s and above, and expensive SRE contractors and all of that. So, Tom, I do want to highlight, like, there's potential cost savings, but like, it's really about doing the total cost of ownership that you keep bringing up. And I don't want anybody listening in to think that cloud is going to save them money and make their breath fresher and their teeth whiter and cure cancer. Well, it might cure cancer depending on how but the point being that it's about that total cost of ownership that you're talking about, and working through the steps and really looking at, what are my staffing costs? Like, don't make the mistake of the Tennessee Valley Authority and fire all of your data center practitioners and think that you're going to save money, because you're not, right? Like, you have to rationalize your portfolio. You can't just do the cloud first and just move everything, right? It's about the thoughtfulness to it. So I did want to highlight, like, we don't want to lose the track of the point of this.
Well, the smart part about Cloud Smart, as opposed to Cloud First, is application rationalization. It mandates that you do application rationalization. It's a strategic document, but it's simply put that you must do application rationalization.
Yeah, which I think is the planning part, right? If you don't know what you have and you just move, to Bill's point earlier, it really does become a challenge on the back end of, oh crap, how did we now take what you had control of? Which I think is that emotional part, right? That's the challenge of, okay, well, I've just moved this from kind of an OpEx variable that I could deal with to an OpEx fix that I don't have control over. So, I think, again, to use Cassidy's name, which he would love, but I think that's one of the big pieces that, he focuses on, and it's part of the understanding. And to kind of then tie that into to Greg's question here is there a number in that, IT spend that, that you want to kind of budget, right? And does it tie to the specific percentage number as a target when looking at AppRat? I'm going to take it one step further and add the acquisition side of that, right? How I think that is one of the challenges that is really on the forefront, and is how do you acquire this? How do you acquire, not only the services, the plan, because of the evolving nature of technology today, but how do you start to budget for that, kind of going forward? So again, I'll throw that one to both of you.
I'll play off of Bill's answer.
I've already said too much. I feel like I've taken up this whole discussion with me just philosophizing and saying how awesome Tom is. So, I'm gonna be quiet for this one because I just filibustered the last answer. So, Tom, please.
All right. So, I just think that we need to go back to basics, configuration management, put it on paper, what your inventory is. If you think about some of the initiatives coming out of CISA, they're going to want to reduce the number of endpoints there are to monitor and consolidate that. They have a tremendous mandate. Nobody likes their job because it has so much visibility and risk to it. I totally am inspired by those people over there working diligently to keep our infrastructure safe. To Bill's point, I think there does need to be identified a critical infrastructure, data center as critical infrastructure for the federal government. And whether we create our own and put it strategically across the country or do colo or a hybrid of those, I think we need to reach that decision here soon because we have a tremendous opportunity with the TMF fund and CISA's mandate to really coalesce on using the same data to make business decisions.
I do want to pick at this a little bit, and I do want to ask you specifically, Tom, about one aspect, which is the training side. So, Greg's question is asking, is there a percentage that we should be aiming for? And I always get queasy when people come up with magic numbers.
Calling, by the way.
What's that?
That's OMB calling.
Oh, are they watching the show? Did you say something?
Are we in trouble? Well, we're just going to cut this short. And no, sorry, none of that. Hopefully. So I'm always wary of magic numbers, right? 3 data centers, 2% of IT, but all of that sort of thing. That always leaves me queasy. But one area that I do like to highlight with agencies is the one percentage that you should be looking at is your training dollars. I feel like the thing that makes or breaks an agency's success or failure at AppRat, cloud migration, all of these things is not just the top cover, but whether or not your staff can support the efforts that you're doing and making sure you're investing in your people. Tom, you and I have talked about this in the past too. I throw out the magic number of 5 to 10% of your IT spend should be on training dollars for your staff. You should expect that your IT staff and anybody that's IT adjacent should have 2 to 3 times the training budget of your normal rank and file staff. That includes acquisition, project managers, program managers, all those people who have to touch this stuff. And I keep coming back to that over and over again because you have to have the skills to be able to be successful. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen? Because again, Justice has been somewhat successful, and GSA has been wildly successful about training and knowledge and how you address the skill gaps in the federal government.
Yeah, I can't agree more. You know, a lot of agencies try and bring in contractors. No offense, Chris, um, and get them to do the implementation and migration from the data center to the cloud, and then they realize, oh, there's nobody here to support it on an ongoing basis, and I can't afford this contractor to continue to support it because they are quite expensive. You really need to, one of the things we address in the cloud strategy document is training, is to make sure your staff is doing the journey with you. It's not being pulled by a leash, that they are, you know, their ability to make a mistake or learn as they're going, because your contractors will make mistakes too and make bad decisions and all of that. You're better off having somebody with some hard knocks go along that journey with you, and provide the training. I mean, we try and provide some cloud training to the user base and the cloud community of practice. We trained over 1,000 federal staff last year, working with Navy, and we're going to continue that on this year. We're going to publish a calendar of events for a variety of products, and we're really excited about that. But we pushed that cloud strategy document. You know, it's 80 pages. Nobody needs to read every page of it. It may, you just read about what sections are yours, whether it's acquisitions or management or training or an exit strategy. We talk about exit strategy on a cloud right up front, because that needs to be a part of your acquisition plan. You know, whether you're moving to just procuring it through another vendor is an exit strategy. Same thing applies. Yeah, that's about it.
I was going to say, like, first and foremost, as one of the people who participated in that training, I'm not too proud to say that I don't know everything that there is to know on these topics, and found it extraordinarily valuable last year. So thank you all for putting that on. The CISSP training I took, and it was just wonderful. It's a wonderful opportunity. And for anybody listening in, I just want to clarify that we talk about the communities of practice here a little bit, and I just want to disambiguate. So this is the ATARC and MorphWorks Cloud and Coffee show. And so we have a cloud and infrastructure community of practice through ATARC that Chris and I are the co-chairs on, along with Tom. And we try to do a lot of work around building the community. And that's open to the vendor community and the government community. And then there's the separate cloud and infrastructure community of practice under the CIO Council, which is open to feds only, and anybody with a .gov or .mil. And I think it looks like we're going to open it up to city and state governments as well, which I'm really excited about. And that's a different community that also puts out all these informative documents that Tom has been talking about. So two parallel groups that have very similar and sometimes overlapping missions, but we do very different work in both of the communities, even though you see a lot of our same faces over and over again in both of them. So if you're in one, you should check out the other. And if you're in the other, you should check out one. Because both of them are awesome with different groups of people doing fantastic work. So I did want to call that out. And thank you again, Tom, for the wonderful work that you all are doing over there. OGP just continues to crank out the hits as far as these documents and giving us all of the information and really bringing the community together around these topics and driving better practices. So just wanted to thank you again for coming on and all the fantastic work that you all are doing over there.
Well, I work in Office of Government-Wide Policy, but I can tell you that I am really proud to work for GSA. We're an outward-facing agency. Our mission is to help agencies government-wide, and the collaboration amongst all of the GSA entities is incredible. I mean, we work with each other. There's nobody I can't talk to within GSA and get some help for an agency that I happen to find out about. And I always preach cloud.gov, login.gov. Those are terrific services. But, you know, whether it be IT categorization or federal acquisition, we're all on the same team, GSA, and we continue to collaborate to help out agencies.
Tom, thank you very much. And again, everybody, thank you for joining. And Nicole, thank you for all of the coordination effort that you always give. And everybody, please join us April 1st, April Fool's Day. But we actually have Rhoda Bunn, the CIO for the International Trade Administration. If you haven't heard Rhoda speak before, she's got a lot of great experience. So please join us. And Nicole, I assume you want to snap